I grab it for you?
Oh, you're done.
Situated.
Okay.
Couldn't approve the rezone.
Swap mine down real quick.
That deed restriction.
You know, and I'm like, suede coat was on, you have this tie and this nice shirt, where's my umbrella?
I know I have over 10
I have fibromyalgia, so
Oh, yeah.
I don't wear a whole lot of heels anymore because
That's essentially what I'm.
get out of
Yeah.
balance.
Thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, that's no problem. It can be tough.
Good evening and welcome to the April 19th, 2022 meeting of the Logan City Council. I've asked Gail Yost if she will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you will all stand, please.
First, I want to say happy Passover to everybody.
Well, thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Gail. I asked her on the fly there to do that, and she was more than willing. Our next item of business this evening is the acceptance of the minutes and the approval of the agenda.
I sent Teresa a couple changes, but I would move acceptance of the minutes and the approval of the agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries. Our 2022 regular meeting schedule is the first and third Tuesdays at 5:30. Our next meeting is May 3rd. The only alteration to that might be somewhere around the 4th of July. So stay tuned. Item number 5 on our agenda, we open the floor for questions and comments for the mayor and/or the council for those items that are not otherwise on the agenda. If anyone would care to speak, please come forward and state your name and give us your opinion.
My name's Jack Peterson. I live at 1376 Boxwood Circle here in Logan. I live on the hillside of the Mountainside Estate subdivision, which is at 1200 East and 1400 North. Myself and several homeowners near me are concerned about the damage being done to the slope of the hill below our homes. At the time the project was approved by Community Development, we were told that from the toe of slope, there was a space of 15 feet before disruption of the soil could occur. I read from the summary report from Community Development, item number 12. Prior to building permit issuance for individual homes, each lot shall have a geotechnical review and approval based on the overall report, home layout, retention wall specifics, grading, cuts and fills, drainage, and driveway layout. There has been significant cuts made in the slope below our homes, and we're concerned, as I think any of you would be if you had a home there. So I called Tanya Rice, who was leading the report from the Planning Community Development. I explained what was going on. She was taken back a little bit because she said, well, the final plot was rejected, there was nothing approved, nothing's been recorded. She said she lived near the project and would drive by and see what was going on. I never heard from her. Then I called Bill Young. He was out on sick leave. I was directed to Tom Dickinson, who's the assistant engineer. He was voluntarily willing and met me and a neighbor on site and gave me the EMT engineering report issued by Brian Roberts. He was not sure what was going on. He didn't know why they were cutting into the hillside. I read from their report. Based on current development plans, steep slopes are present for lots along the east and south borders of the property. Additional recommendations for permanent site grading of the slopes of the property are now required. On the conclusion page, he says, based on the above described supplemental analysis, it is recommended that site grading be completed such that no unbraced slopes are steeper than 2 horizontal to 1 vertical foot. And in conclusion, he says any retaining walls must be properly engineered to maintain stability of the slopes. CMT must review the final grading plans for the project prior to initiation of any construction. Well, there's a lot of development going on. Roads are to be put in. After I talked to Tom, he referred me to Camilla Schultz. I started talking with her, had several conversations with her. Again, she was not sure what was happening or what was being allowed. She would make inquiries. She's been very willing to help. I called Bill Young again. He indicated on his cell phone I disrupted his sick leave. He indicated that his understanding that each lot would have a geotech study at the time of the construction. He was not sure why there was any activity going beyond 15 feet of the roads that were then being put in. I called Phil Pack. He did some of the site testing. He said each home individually analyzed for lot and slope structure. I asked him, why are they cutting into the slope? His best guess was maybe they're putting in some utilities. Well, that's certainly not happening. I guess my calls had some impact. Brent Lawyer, the developer, came to my house. We discussed our concerns. We've got a meeting in the morning at 9 to physically see what's happening there. The concern I have for the city of Logan is that I would prefer to have engineering telling me and the developers what can and cannot be done rather than the developer. I invited the inspector to meet with us as well in the morning. In summary, I don't know if my home's safe or those of my neighbors. Tom Dickinson said the city has the same number of inspectors now as when he started 25 years ago. So the growth and all the activity that's going on in the city, I'm concerned that we haven't maybe kept up with in the engineering department what's going on. Also, another observation from my conversations with Tom, Bill, and Camilla were very appreciative. They were all very helpful, and they really encouraged and appreciated citizen input and oversight. But they each indicated they were very stretched and they could use additional help. So my concern is, are we safe? What's going on there? Are we shorthanded in the engineering department? Do we need to offer some assistance there? The city has so many projects going on. We need to look at the safety of what's being constructed, how it's being handled. A little, maybe a more oversight might be appropriate. So,
Jack,
thank you for your time.
could you explain where your home is?
It's right above the hill.
I'm right on the top of the crest of the development on the east side. My home, if you go up there where they went, where we were told from the toe of slope, which was marked, that they could go 15 feet and then put in a foundation or disrupt the soil. They have cut across there within 2 feet of the toe of slope and have now a drop-off of upwards of 15 feet. And nobody in engineering can tell me if that's allowed, if that's okay, or if we're safe.
Do you already have a city employee scheduled to be at that meeting tomorrow morning?
I've left message with Camilla, with her and her secretary.
Okay, so Camilla's telling me, so it sounds like someone will be at that meeting.
I hope so. I've
and
invited them.
We'll have them follow up with you.
I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm just concerned. I don't want to wake up in the morning and be tilted in my bed thinking that we've fallen off the hillside, and I don't mean to exaggerate, but for the safety of all of us and the citizenry of Logan, we may need to get some additional help in the engineering inspection department.
That's a legitimate concern.
Thank you.
Yes, very legitimate. Thank you. Very concerning. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the council this evening? Somebody's trying to call us. Seeing no one, we'll close the question and comment portion of the agenda. Is there anything else we need to do with respect to that? That does concern me because Planning Commission was very specific when they were concerned about that slope and preserving those homes.
Right, we'll have staff follow up on those conditions to make sure whatever the Planning Commission conditioned is being met.
And if it's not, do we have recourse?
I'm sure we do.
Okay, thank you.
That's a big liability.
Okay, Mayor, we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a brief update on Center Street and kind of give a shout out to the merchants along Center Street and especially to Renette Anderson of Anderson Seed and Garden. She called me the other day, and the planting strip kind of between Great Harvest and Waffle Iron is actually the city's. Anderson's has been maintaining the
the planters for us. And that's the other great thing. Now the merchants have voluntarily taken over, and they are paying for all the cost of the flowers and maintaining that, and they've banded together to do snow removal together during the winter. I'm just really tickled at kind of their involvement. But Brunette called me and said, you know, those planters are kind of a mess. Can the city get to them? And I said, yeah, I'll talk to the parks people. And then she emailed me back and sent me a picture. She said, we did it. We're going to just consider this kind of a little donation from Anderson's to the city. And they just made it look so nice. It took them and their staff a few hours, and it's just really appreciated. And I guess I'd like to encourage other people around the city to, you know, take a look around. And if there's a park strip or if there's something you could just take care of, it would be appreciated and be wonderful. So that's just my little shout out. Again, happens to be Mark's wife, but I just appreciate her being proactive and taking the initiative to kind of solve a little messy problem that she could take care of. So it was appreciated. Now, the next item on the agenda will be a report on the Logan City Water Restriction Plan and Water Conservation Information Campaign. We'll have our Public Works Director, Paul Lindhart, and our Water Wastewater Manager, Joe Hawks, do that. We just wanted to be proactive. There probably will be another dry year this year. They started developing this last year when we were in a drought. So if there are certain levels and certain conditions that exist, we don't have to scramble for a plan. It automatically triggers, you know, predefined conditions. So please go ahead and make your presentation.
You bet. Thanks, Mayor. I'll give a brief background and explanation of it, and then Joe will kind of get into the details a little more. And if you have any thoughts, recommendations. First off, we're not necessarily looking, it's not a codified thing. We're not looking for a vote or a resolution. It's just more informational for you and the public, as we've had some questions on, hey, what is the plan, or are we expecting restrictions, those kinds of things. And we want to thank also, we've got several members of our Water and Wastewater Advisory Board here, and they helped give recommendations and thoughts, and have kind of given their blessing to this as well. So we're grateful for that. But there's two documents, the first of which is and we'll do this in reverse order. Joe will present them in the reverse order I'm doing it. The Logan City Water Division Drought Operation Plan, and what it really is we looked at it strictly from an operational capacity. When do we, as the water department, feel restrictions might be appropriate based on just our operational capacity, not so much the current conditions or the current climate as how people feel about those things, but just our operations. What can we produce in water, and when do we feel that's a problem that we need to enact mandatory versus voluntary restrictions? So I hope that makes sense, because this doesn't necessarily promote conservation, but our goal was to how can our system and what can it handle? So that's the drought operational plan, and Joe will go through the details of that. The second document is more the conservation side of it. Sending out notifications and promotional material, those kinds of things of, hey, how can you conserve water? What can you do better? And so we put together a plan. It's kind of an annual plan of what resources do we have to help educate people on conservation methods. There are a ton of state programs and water district and different places that we can take advantage of things they've already put in place, as opposed to trying to necessarily reinvent the wheel or doing what we think is better for us. So we're trying to take advantage of a lot of that. And that will be through maybe, and Joel will present details, but weekly updates on our Facebook page and maybe radio ads and things like that from a conservation and reduction standpoint. So there are two, I just wanted to present the two different frames of mind of these two plans, and then to understand how we came up with them. And then Joel will go through the detail and answer any questions.
So first off, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to present. This is my first presentation to the council as the Water and Wastewater Division Manager. I wanted to actually throw this in there because this is the question I get the most. How are we looking for water this year? This is a Snowtel site at Tony Grove. The purple line here is essentially the average snow water equivalent, or how much water is in the snowpack there. The average from 1991 to 2020. The blue line is this year. You can see it stops there. That's where we're at right now. And the green line is last year. And I just wanted to give some good news of the cooler weather last week, and the snow that we had up at Tony's Grove really improved our snowpack. So again, I guess drought is very specific based on the time and the location and the system, but it gets me some hope for this upcoming season. With that, I'd like to talk a little bit about our system as well, because it is a unique system. I love working with it, and to understand how we need to react to the drought that we see, we need to understand the system. Most of our flow comes from DeWitt Springs. It's a spring about 5 miles up the canyon. It supplies the vast majority of flow for Logan and a significant amount for Utah State as well. It flows out of the ground into our pipe and down the canyon into our tanks that many of you can see up on the bench there. Different from other communities along the Wasatch Front, which pull from reservoirs, ours is a groundwater source, so we don't have to treat it as much. But we also don't have the storage ability that those reservoirs do. So when we look at how we need to operate during a drought season, we can't store up water from the springs and put it anywhere like they can in the reservoirs further south. The tanks that you see on the hillside, they only hold water for a day or two during our peak demand season. So those are really just for operation. So it changes a little bit how we have to react to drought and what we can do. In addition to the tanks and the springs, we also have wells that we can turn on during the summer, and those make up the difference for the flows that DeWitt Springs can't supply to the city. So we rely on those. Once you understand that, then we can go into the conservation promotional plan that we have here. Like Paul said, we want to primarily use our Facebook Public Works page to push out material, as well as our Logan City Water page that would share links to these sites. Some of the things that we've just brainstormed and thought about promoting would be the state-funded rebate programs, links to USU extension programs, and those cover a lot of great irrigation tips, mowing tips, and planting tips. One of my favorite that I see every year, and I think it's great advice, is this one right here from the Water Resources Division. And that recommends how many times people need to water their lawn. As you can see, we don't need to be watering at all right now. Many people overwater their lawn, and it doesn't benefit the lawn, it just wastes the water. So this would be an example of some of the material that we'd like to push out on our Facebook page, as well as planting tips to drought-resistant plants, local plants, things like that. Additionally, we would promote indoor fixture, the low-flow use, and facts about our system as well, including our peak use and volumes, how much that is converted. I know everybody thinks about how many Olympic swimming pools are we using. And we have that information. We have a great SCADA system that tracks all of this. Let's see.
In swimming pools?
Well, as an engineer, I can convert it.
Quantifiable.
Just curious.
Standard engineering unit, swimming pools. We would also like to promote average water use goals for people based on their lot size. So you can look at your water bill that you have in July to say, how do I compare to what I should be doing? Am I doing a good job? Is there a place where I can cut back? Am I overwatering? And we can give that information out to the public as well, so they can see how they're doing and kind of gauge where they can improve.
Did you say you are giving that out, or you can?
We will. We
Okay.
have not been, but that would be
Alright.
part of this promotional
Yeah,
material.
because there's different lot sizes and all that.
And it would have to be based on lot size.
Yeah.
So, and finally, we would also use the Facebook page and the website, as well as radio and other media to push out any water restriction information, if needed. And that leads us into the the drought operation plan. If you've looked over it, you can see that we have 5 different levels that we've linked it into. Our blue is our normal efforts, or winter, fall, spring efforts where there's not much water use. And our green level, the active conservation efforts, that's going to be throughout the whole irrigation season, where we're really trying to promote that material to get people to conserve and most of all reduce the waste. We can cut out a lot of the wasted water. As we go along, there's our level 3 mild water restrictions that we would consider. Level 4 is the moderate water restrictions, and level 5 would be severe water restrictions. That would be at a point where we're concerned about our tanks running dry, about serious health impacts to our system if we do see pressures drop too low and our tanks run out. So in those, we would be considering reducing watering to a certain number of times per week, certain hours during the day or night usually, as well as getting rid of all outdoor watering if we got to that level, restricting watering to just pets, livestock, vegetable gardens, and fruit trees, things like that. So we have those levels there, and we've based these trigger points, if you see here on the right, consumption is 80 to 89% of total capacity. We've based those on what we feel is reasonable for our past use.
So is total capacity the capacity you have at the point of time when you choose the level, or is capacity an average of past capacity?
It would be at that point in time. And that's an important thing to note, because let's say normally we have 4 wells that we can run. If we're operating during the summer and we have an issue with a motor and suddenly one of those wells is taken off, our total capacity shrinks down. Mm-hmm. And that would be a scenario where it could bump us into an area where we have restrictions.
Or say if you have 1 million gallons of water one week and a month later you only have 500,000, then you're operating at a significantly lower capacity.
Exactly.
But how do you measure, never mind, it's a long question.
Big answer.
I'll ask the question later.
Well, how will you notify the public when we jump from level 3 to level 5 or whatever?
That would be through these social media posts and radio ads.
And big alarms on the top of the building?
And we've utilized like reverse 911 phone calls and those sort of things as much as we can in the past. We've gone to door hangers in emergency situations. Those are usually isolated to a neighborhood, but in whatever way we can is how we do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we make an effort to have some of these materials in Spanish?
Absolutely.
So before everybody panics because they'll have heard a small portion of your conversation with us today, what is your prediction as to where you likely see us based on the current snowpack? Because I'm assuming we might hear calls that Logan's going to be restricting water or et cetera. So what's your best guess as far as where you think we might end up on these restrictions this year?
Bring that first chart up again.
Excellent question. Yeah, and this, I feel like this answers some of that. So this graph shows the total daily gallons that Logan City produced since 2018. So all of these big peaks are flows during the summer. You can see we're producing a lot more because people are using more. Even though the city is growing, we're actually seeing a slight downward trend. Our lowest peak was last year. And that's why we're so excited about promoting the conservation materials. I think people really took to heart, hey, we are in a drought. We need to reduce and save water and cut out some of that waste. And we saw that last year, which was why we didn't have to implement these harsher restrictions where we're going around. We were promoting the materials, and that's how we want to focus on it. However, we did see last year that some of our flows were restricted at DeWitt Springs, so we couldn't take as much water from the springs, which meant that our operational capacity jumped up higher. So In a percentage means, we're usually between 60 and 70%. Last year, our peak use reached 74%, which is higher, but we still had one well that we hadn't even turned on at all. Logan City has done a great job of preparing for drought and adding resiliency and backups to our system. So we can have the growth, we can supply the water, and we just want to make sure that we're promoting wise use of the water and eliminating waste. For this year, I'm not sure what we would see. I'm hopeful that DeWitt Springs will last much longer than last year, and that was the real trigger that pushed us up into the 70% range. With the snowpack that we have now, it would suggest that we're not going to be worse than last year, and we didn't reach a point where we would have these restrictions from last year. So if I were to guess, I would say no, but anything can change. We could have a wet summer, we could have an exceptionally dry summer, people could use more water. Those are factors that I can't foresee right now.
So we should always still conserve.
Yes, it's good to not waste water. And that's actually all of the presentation. If you'd like, we have these longer promotional materials that explain each of the levels that we could go over, but I think that would take more time.
And they are available for anyone who wants them on the, within the council agenda materials, correct?
Yes.
So people can review them and they can contact you all if they have questions.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And we, as you can see, clearly kept it as a draft form.
Right.
In anticipation of tonight. If you want to take more time to look at them, send any thoughts. But once they're not, we can easily put this on the water website and put them out on Facebook as well. Just saying, hey, here's what we shared, read through it, and here's where we're at.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm aware of the efforts that you and your department have made to basically seal the joints. You know, the efficiency within the pipe system has been commendable. Can you tell us how much, what's the measurement that you've saved on that? It's a pretty good size.
I think some of that is seen in this graph where you can see this downward trend. Even though we have a population that's growing, I think people are using water better and we're eliminating some of those leaks. We do have an old system. We have areas with really old pipe that is corroded that we're trying to replace and fix those leaks. And we have a great team that's out there working, but it is a work in progress. It's hard to keep up with a system that has places where it's a 100-year-old pipe that's still providing water.
So I sit on the Water District Board as well. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's a significant conservation effort that the state has put forward for all of Cache County. There is going to be money through the state for the Rip Your Strip kind of program. And that will be on some of those, the Slow the Flow kind of websites. They'll let us know about that. They already have a toilet replacement program that individuals can participate in to, eliminate,
Why are you
low-flow
smirking,
toilets.
Mark?
Oh, it's like sweet.
Oh.
Ernesto needs a new toilet in his new house, so.
I thought it was sweet. Everybody's going to rip their strip
No,
and
it's
come
like,
in your
well, that,
plants.
and that too, so that works for me.
So I'm glad to see that you all are going to do all that, and I hope that we can all eventually coordinate and Cache Valley can be better for it, because we all need to pay attention to a resource that is very, very precious.
And that's one of our goals with this promotional plan, is to gather each of those and put them in a location for our citizens, rather than going to the water resource page and the water rights page and each of these different programs. We'll have all those links in one location. There's one for smart irrigation clocks, a rebate program as well.
Oh, yeah, that's what I forgot.
Yeah,
There are irrigation audits that you can sign up for at the Extension Service that the Water District is helping to pay for the students to do that. And they've had a tremendous uptick in requests this year. But they did audit the hospital last year at the hospital's request, and they saved significantly on their outside water. So,
There's a lot out there.
So do you have any plans for like partnering with sprinkler companies or lawn service businesses? Because I know people who don't take care of their lawns themselves, frequently those companies are the ones that are setting the timers for their sprinkler system. Is there any commercial component that you could include? I think that would probably be helpful. Because those of us that are not terribly tech savvy, we rely on outside people. And like for me, example, it would be helpful to know the questions to ask a lawn service as far as how do you have my sprinkling system set? And are you following these guidelines?
It's a great idea. For instance, our renewables board, they just brought in heating and air conditioning contractors so they could tell them about the rebates the city offered to try and reduce energy cost on new air conditioning, other things. So along those same lines, that could be a great idea.
That's a good idea.
Based on, thanks.
Good suggestion. Thank you.
So are you hoping to get final comments from council and the public within the next couple of weeks and then finalize it so you can post it before the summer season?
I think within the next couple weeks, maybe before the next council meeting, would be perfect for us.
Okay.
okay.
And
Thank
again,
you.
we invite the public to submit comments if they have thoughts on the
And I think they
documents
can
as well.
submit it to you or directly to Public Works.
You bet.
Right.
Okay? We encourage people to do that.
Fine job.
Thank
on
you
your
very
first
much.
presentation, Joe.
Thank you.
We look forward to them in the future.
He likes it when he doesn't have to come here. That means everything's going swimming. We'll move now to council business. Last week, Planning Commission met. They reviewed 3 projects. One is Altura, which is a large multifamily construction of 494 units that will be on 2200 South on some property that was annexed recently into Logan City.
What's the west coordinate?
It's east.
Oh, east.
It's 800 west and
800
2200 south, right?
800 west or,
Yes, west.
Yeah.
but it's,
And 2200 south.
right, but it's east of Highway 89.
Oh, I apologize if that's what you were referring to. I thought you were giving the
West
address, the coordinates of the
Yeah.
location.
No, I was like, okay, 800. I knew 800 was in there, but I was like, 800 west is hard for me to, because it's,
That far south.
Yeah.
anyway, it's
I'll help
east of
you
the
after the
highway.
meeting.
Okay, it's east of the highway on 2200 South. There was a great deal of discussion about road construction and the ability to navigate into and out of this large development. Because it met the zoning, it was approved with some conditions. There was a rezone request for a piece of property on 10th West and 2nd South. I unfortunately had to leave before that presentation was over, but that will be coming to us one way or the other, however they decided. And then there was a redesign of an original design called Brickyard 2.0. They had submitted a project and they have now changed it quite significantly to have more housing and have it be a larger footprint, a larger structure on the same footprint.
Where is that located, Jeannie?
That is located at,
Isn't it 800 north and First West?
it's like 50 west, 800 north and 50 west. Right behind Love to Cook and, yeah. I believe at one point in time there were some trailers there because there's trees every so often down the piece of property. So, and that is my planning commission report. We will move now to our action items. We have 2 public hearings and 2 other items on our agenda this evening. Our first public hearing is a budget adjustment. And Rich, would you like to go over that quickly?
Absolutely.
few items to consider. Most of these are grants. A request to appropriate $5,616 from the U.S. Department of Justice for police officer cases that they worked, $362 for our 911 center from a state grant that's being increased, $3,877 from the fire department for a state of Utah EMS grant, and then 2 related to leases for our golf course, golf carts, $231,602. These are all, this is the present value of future lease payments for the next 4 years. In addition, we would need another $1,500 of funds for payments for May and for June.
So just so the public knows, that large number has to be capitalized now, where in prior years or in the past, it was not necessarily, the entire thing wasn't capitalized. So the lease would just be expended annually. But now the state has, or the feds, I don't know which.
The nerdy accountant gods.
Made the decision that those types of leases had to be capitalized up front. So everyone knew that that obligation was outstanding for the next 5 years. Did I say that right? Okay. Any questions from the council before I open it? This is a public hearing. If anyone would like to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name. Seeing no one gets up and talks about this stuff. I'll bring it back to the council for a decision.
I'll move approval of Resolution 2212. It looks like they're all good. I understand the finance on the golf carts, not courts. So I'll move approval.
You're from Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next one is our Power Advisory Board procedural guideline updates and related matters. Craig, do you want to go over this quickly? Or
yeah, I
does it-
can talk real briefly about it. Mark presented this at the last council meeting and workshop. This is a proposed amendment to Chapter 2.28, the procedural guidelines for the Power Advisory Board. This is really just a cleanup amendment to make these procedural changes to make sure they're in line with the current practice. 2 changes to be aware of. Section 10 says that no more than 3 are non-residents of the city. The former said no more than half of the 7-member board. And then 50, compensation. It sounds like the board preferred donuts and bagels over the $10 compensation that they said. So we're deleting that section.
Okay. This is not,
Donuts and bagel, maybe I want to be on that.
this is not a public hearing, so if there is any further discussion, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion.
I would move approval of ordinance 22-09.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Anybody have any last comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This item C is continued from March 15th. It is a public hearing on a rezone. Tanya, would you like to go over this with us just briefly?
Absolutely.
Wow, you're all flowered and you don't have to wear a mask.
What 2 weeks does. Alrighty. Much better, whoops. Okay. So, about a month ago, I presented this. So I'm going to go over some high points right now. I hope it's not too much. You can ask questions if you need to. But this is a proposal for a rezone and a subdivision of 1 1/3 acre developed parcel from MR12 to MR20. They're doing a rezone and a subdivision. The reason that we're doing this, the first step in this is a rezone, because currently the MR12 zone would allow them to have 16 units, and they have 20. So in order for them to do a subdivision, they must rezone first. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to just talk about that briefly first. The parcel was developed in '94. when 26 units could have been permitted. They did 5 buildings of 4 units each, so a total of 20 units. That's what currently stands. They condominiumized.
How big is the parcel?
Pardon?
How big is the parcel?
1.36.
So how many units could be on it?
Right now, 16, and they have 20.
Thank you.
The applicant's intent is to change the nature of the parcel from a condominium where they own just the building to a subdivision where they own the building and the land. The owners independently own the building and the land. The underlying purpose is to make the property more marketable and easier to sell. This is the parcel right here, 4th North, or 1400 North, just across from Standard Plumbing. The applicant at this point is requesting the city to work with them now on a legal rezone. So here you can see the 5 buildings, and each of these are garages associated with each building, and then a private road.
And the 5 buildings are what are condos, not the.
They are
units within-
condominiums.
Not the units within the building, it's the building
The
itself.
building itself, there's 5 owners, each owns a building. Many of the owners, one of the planning commissioners said has been owned for the duration since '94. So long time owners. 5 separate owners and then common area. Let's see. This is the current zoning, or this is the future land use map with MR. Some residential nearby and commercial just across the street, commercial services across the street. And this is the current zone. Like I said, it's MR12 with NR6 to the south and commercial services to the north. So since 1994, this area has been, a Bridger neighborhood has been downzoned twice since '94. And this is leaving the development a legally existing non-conforming, which just means that it's fine the way it is, but it is not conforming to the current zone. In order for them to subdivide, they must upzone first, and that's what I just got done saying. This is the condominium plat from 1994, showing the 5 buildings and the 20 units, associated garages and common areas. I want to review just quickly a little bit about the history of the zoning. In '94, it would have allowed 26 units on their 1 1/3 acres. Currently, it allows 16, and they're rezoning because they have 20. But what that does is it allows, ultimately, if they were to swipe the slate clean, they could have put 27 units on there. And staff has had lengthy discussions about the neighborhood compatibility. They wrote a very compelling letter, but when it comes right down to it, we need to look at the zoning and make sure that what we are recommending is best for the community and for the zone. So in this lengthy talk about neighborhood compatibility, I'm just going to summarize some points that staff has discussed. If it were to be rezoned, it would allow for 27 units instead of the existing 16. That's fairly substantial. There are no other MR20 zones in the area. It would be kind of an island. Single families to the south and MRs around it, which is less than the MR20, obviously. Bridger neighborhood already contains a high percentage of multifamily houses, so in this worst case scenario, it could lead to an increase in units and, what comes along with apartments. It could be possibly transient lifestyle. And according to the school district, there have been negative impacts on the elementary school already due to the high rate of transient occupancy. And one of the most important is Logan City's zoning actions to downzone this area over the last several years, or last many years. to prevent this high density in the area. So these are the things that staff and we just kind of hammered out to make this presentation. Should it be rezoned, it would look like this, MR20 in the middle of MR12. Staff recommends denial of this based on best planning practices of not upzoning when the area has been intentionally downzoned over the years. That's pretty much the bottom line. This is what the area currently looks like from 1400 north looking south. So this is what they're calling the front. Actually, this is actually a side. The front is facing the street. But I wanted to recap a little bit about what PC had come up with. They unanimously recommended denial of the rezone 6-0 for starters. Their discussion points included recommending a deed restriction on the rezone, discussed a downzone immediately following the subdivision to prevent spot zoning, and there was a short discussion about how this could benefit the city, which that didn't go very far. But in the end, they unanimously decided that they would recommend leaving the parcel as it is. We had a process that wasn't followed for a legal subdivision at the time of their development, and PC concluded that it didn't make sense to go through all of those steps now. That was their discussion. A couple comments about the subdivision. Of course, the subdivision is contingent upon the rezone. If the rezone goes away, the subdivision goes away. If rezoned, it must comply with MR20 zoning and the subdivision standards that currently exist. The proposed plan that they have provided, which is right here, does not meet the requirements, but could be conditioned to do so and meet the requirements of parking setbacks. All of the requirements. The trick would be open space, where I don't know where they're going to get. Well, it doesn't matter what, but they will need 30% open space, and right now they've got about 20. So those bugs can be worked out later. That's a detail, but what we're looking at right now is the rezone and a conditioned.
We're just looking at the
conditions
rezone.
on the.
We're just looking at the rezone.
We're just looking at the rezone. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop right there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
So I know we're just talking about the rezone. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
With the conditional use, I just have a question
Yes.
that's underlying that. So if it was rezoned
Yes.
and then platted,
Yes.
the proposal was that then they would immediately rezone it back to MR12,
Well-
like once that was, am I understanding that correctly?
There was discussion that might be an avenue that they could take.
But they would have to ask for the rezone, not the city. The city could.
Yes, they would have to ask for the rezone, I think.
Yep, they would.
Yeah.
So it would not be in the city's ability to say.
We couldn't condition it as such, no.
No, we can't.
So once it's 20, it's 20.
For what?
Goodness of their heart, they could come back after
Correct.
a change and request to have it go back to 12. But
Correct.
there's no ability for the city to implement that.
No.
That rezone.
That is correct.
Okay.
Can I ask one question?
Please.
Should this go to MR20, is there a possibility of increasing density even on a partial piece of it, part of it? Like if they took down that one building on the end?
I don't, oh. So
If they
you're-
subdivided it, would they be able to do anything bigger?
Is there enough space on the ground with the existing buildings to add increased density in one small portion? Is that the question?
Is that the question?
Or tearing down that one building?
If they tore down one building, could they put in a 45
Sure.
foot high building?
Yep, sure. Okay.
I had to process the question, Jeannie.
Sorry, I didn't ask it very well. Does anybody else have any questions before I open it to the public? This is a public hearing. Any member of the public who wishes to speak to this, please come forward and state your name.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Raymond. I'm an attorney with Alton and Hogan, and I'm here on behalf of the proponent property owners, and I just want to recognize Theron and Julie Stoddard, who are owners of one of the buildings in the West Point project. Today, I'd just like to briefly highlight 5 items that I think will help the council understand our request, make them become comfortable with it, and hopefully vote in favor of the rezone request. First, I'd like to emphasize the purposes of the municipality's general land use authority. The Municipal Land Use Development and Management Act, found in Utah Code Section 10-9A-102, includes the following purposes: to promote the prosperity, to improve the good order, convenience, and aesthetics of each municipality and present and future inhabitants, to protect the tax base, and to protect property values. To accomplish these goals, the same act provides the municipality may enter into land use controls and development agreements, including restrictive covenants and development agreements governing, among other things, uses and density. And that'll become more important on my second point. So second, I'd like to emphasize that the proponent is not looking to redevelop the property. They're not looking to add more buildings, to demolish any of the existing buildings. All they are trying to do is to increase the density in order to file a subdivision plat so that it becomes a traditional subdivision rather than a condominium subdivision. The neighbors, surrounding neighbors will know no difference. There's not going to be, trucks coming, taking out dirt, or, bulldozers knocking down buildings. And to alleviate any concerns of this that the council or the neighborhood may have, what the proponent is proposing is that we enter into a restrictive covenant that would be applicable to the property that would restrict any additional development that would increase the density beyond what it is today. And so, in other words, the density as it sits today would not and could not be increased. And that would be a recorded covenant that would be recorded against the land. So it would run with the land. Any future owners would all be subject to it. And I talked to Mr. Carlson, and I would work closely with him to make sure that the city is well protected and comfortable with that document. Furthermore, as mentioned, West Point would apply for a down zone back to the MR12 zoning to be effective after the subdivision has been recorded to restore the property back to its prior zone. If we have to do that on, good faith between the parties or some sort of condition, it's all the same to us. We would file that right away to be, like I said, effective once we got the subdivision plat elements worked out and that subdivision plat recorded. Third, the MR20 zoning in this neighborhood is compatible with the surrounding areas because there is a high density is probably the wrong word, a lot of multifamily housing in the area. And I think that's particularly irrelevant and addressed if we do the restrictive covenant that I just mentioned. That alleviates a lot of those concerns. The only difference, if the zoning is granted, is that it would turn the property into a conforming property. So density would be the same, traffic would be the same, parking would be the same, and all uses would be the same. It's really just a legal, technical paper maneuver that we're using to try and get this into a more traditional subdivision. Fourth, the characterization of the property as a condo subdivision and the legal uncertainty resulting therefrom have adversely impacted the owners and their ability to obtain financing, to obtain insurance, someone has sought refinances, and all these third parties dealing with and analyzing the property are confused by the ownership because it's not a traditional condo with shared walls and dividing up airspace. And so those third-party professionals aren't quite sure what to do and how to treat it. And to exacerbate that issue, the underwriting requirements for condominiums has increased and become more costly. since the 2008 housing crisis, because condominiums were, and I don't understand all the technicalities behind it, but they were apparently involved or used as a way to fraudulently obtain some loans. Finally, I just want to emphasize that I believe this will benefit and is in the interest of the city, the owners, and the neighborhood at large, and certainly will not harm the city. Converting this property into a traditional subdivision will ultimately result in the ability of the property owners to improve and maintain the aesthetics, character, and convenience of the property, will preserve and potentially increase the tax revenues of the city, will allow the property to avoid becoming blighted due to diminished values, lack of marketability, inability to obtain competitive financing, and will increase the value and marketability of the property. It will also encourage consistent long-term ownership and will bring the property in line with the strategies, goals, and visions of the city, as the city encourages, supports, and desires marketable, well taken care of properties that generate property and tax revenues for the city. So consistent with the Land Use Authority's directions I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we believe that this rezone, the resultant subdivision, does promote prosperity, improves the good order and convenience of this parcel, which is within Logan City boundaries. It protects the tax base and it protects the property values. We would ask the city to approve. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
We're good.
How long would this,
No.
I gotta ask something.
Please, let's hear it.
Gave us all this
Usually in
time.
public hearings, we don't ask questions of the people who speak. But that's okay, go
My
ahead.
apologies if I went out of turn.
May I ask a
Yes.
How long would this take from this process to do it? Are we talking months or weeks or what, days?
I think potentially weeks.
Because you gotta have another hearing, don't you?
Well, this may, so I spoke with Ms. Rice before the meeting, and if I understood what she said correctly, we couldn't condition this on the restrictive covenant being put in place, so we would have to table this while Mr. Carlson and I work on the restrictive covenant, assuming that's the route that the council wants to go. And so we would present that agreement at a later date and get the approval there. And then as far as once the rezone and that are in place, it would just be working with staff and getting the subdivision plat in a recordable position. And I believe that can all be taken care of at the staff level.
If there's enough open space.
Say that again?
If there's enough open space.
Yeah, so we're going to have to work through all those, and we fully plan on cooperating and working closely with all the staff through those subdivision issues.
Yeah, because that's going to be a challenge since it's only that big.
Yeah.
And there's not enough
There
open
are some
space.
constraints. So we're trying to get through the first hurdle right now, and then we'll work with Steve Earle and some engineers to see what can be done to increase open space, whether that's moving some parking around or whatnot, but we're aware of those challenges, and we will address those. But if we can't, then there's really nothing we can do at that point, so it'll be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this?
Hi, Dr. Gail Yost. I just wanted to know two things. If it's put into a subdivision, does that mean that the individual buildings can be sold separately from one another, as opposed to right now it is all part of one complex, therefore they have to be sold together? Is that, would that be the correct assumption?
They can be sold separately now.
They can be
Gail,
sold separately now.
What my understanding of the difference is, and correct me if I'm wrong, right now the buildings are owned by separate people, but the land underneath them is owned by all of them.
Okay.
And they want to make it so the building and its 20% green space are sold, and the next building with its 20% green space is sold.
If that's correct, is it not possible now for them to improve the the property without being a subdivision. He was talking about whether or not it was going to improve the subdivision by having, as a subdivision, by having it to where the people could put more money into it. I would think that if they own the property together, but the buildings separately, they could do that now. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for letting me take a minute. My name's Theron Stoddard, and my mom and I own a couple of the buildings out of the 5, and I just want to mention from a citizen's point of view and what we're trying to work through here is we've been working at this for quite a while. We've tried multiple times to do this, and all we are really trying to do, like Jeremy said, is change temporarily the zoning so that we can reclassify them as apartments, which makes it much easier for us to deal with insurance and financing. And if we didn't have to change the zoning temporarily in order to reclassify it as apartments, we wouldn't be here. And so granted that the Planning Commission is very concerned about spot zoning and the effects that it would have around the surrounding area, to us, we don't want to really change the zoning. We want to put it back immediately and leave it the way it is just so that we can get it classified as apartments. And we've been trying to do that for some time, so thank you for considering this.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this? We'll bring it back to the council. I have one concern, and that is that I know this has been continued since March, and before that it was heard by Planning Commission. I would think if they were wanting to do a restrictive deed covenant, it would already be in the works.
That's something they can offer any time before the council makes a decision on the rezone. They can't do it after, and it can't be a condition of the rezone.
Right, exactly. We can't condition it.
Correct, right. So, and maybe Jeremy can speak to that, but it is something that can be offered before.
Like, offered or done?
Done.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Because it seems to me that, anyway, we like to talk around all this stuff, but if you really have that commitment, it would seem that we would have that in front of us as part of the package. I don't know.
And Jeremy's correct. I mean, we can work through, if that's the route they'd like to go, we can work with him on a deed restriction to make sure it protects the density requirements, and it will run with the land. And to remove a deed restriction takes some time and effort to need the city's consent as well.
How does a deed restriction work with 5 different owners?
And that's something we'd be really careful with. So the deed restriction, especially if the subdivision happens, needs to cover every one of those properties and the owners of that property.
What happens if the owner doesn't want to do that?
Then we don't get a deed restriction.
And then we just have an MR20.
And well, this has got to happen before.
This would happen before we change the zone.
So if no deed restriction, if that's the route you'd like to go, and they don't produce a deed restriction that's going to work, then the issue seems to be moved.
From a timing perspective, if it was going to be, again, deferred, what time frame would that be for the deferment? I'd like to say that this would come back to the council in 6 weeks and a month.
I don't think it would take that long. We could continue this for a meeting or 2. It shouldn't really take that long. I don't know how long it would take for Jeremy to work with the property owners. That would be the variable here.
It should not take long. So I've reached out to Craig, like I said, several days ago, and spoken to some other members. So we've got the concepts in place. We just need to work through the actual language of the deed restriction.
So I would probably say...
Does that sort of thing have to be agreed to by all owners, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, correct.
All the owners do want to do that. I don't know if I can say that.
And that's a variable. I wasn't certain if it's, if all of them consented, or if he's got to try to rally up all the owners to sign off on this.
Let me just mention that all the owners did sign a consent as part of this application to have, joint representation and to operate on a united front. So that's been submitted as part of our application.
Okay. Does the deed restriction stipulate a time frame of when they have to
down zone again to the MR12, or how does the,
No, typically the deed restriction restricts the use of the property. We may be able to insert something like that. We were discussing more of restricting just density to make sure the density didn't increase, but we could include something like that.
Tom?
Yeah, at first blush, looking at this thing, I didn't like it. I didn't like the spot zoning. I didn't like that kind of stuff. But if in truth we do the legal work, and if we do the correct stepping and staging of this, the neighbors are not going to be affected by this in any way. It's going to be the same buildings, the same density, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think the city would be hurt because it's not spot zoning. It's going to be a temporary thing to allow a legal maneuver to take place so that then it goes back to the 12 or current zoning. I think there's an advantage is if the owners have the ability and the incentive by owning a building on property that they own, and that they can then make improvements to it and have the property value can maybe be enhanced, then the city gains something. So I think we ought to move to continue, is that the right word?
Yeah,
Continue
continue
it for 2 meetings and then bring it back again. That's what I would do. And I think we solve a problem, and it's not.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I would second it. You know, as I looked at this too, I mean, having been part of HOAs, I know how it can be very complicated. And the city is the one that did the down zones, not the property owner. So I do have some sympathy for the fact that when the project was done, I mean, one could argue, well, why all the other people did subdivisions, this project was unique. Had we not downzoned, they would have been in their rights to do this without coming to us to have it be a subdivision as well. So I would be inclined to, I'm seconding it based on that very lengthy conversation.
And we need to do a date specific, so May 17th is 2 meetings from now. So that's the motion.
But I would say if it's not done on the 17th, I would be inclined to vote against it. So I mean, I think time is of the essence, and it's already been continued once. If it's asked like, oh, we can't get all the owners on the same page, we need more time. I mean, it's been percolating for a while, and I appreciate Jeannie's comment that we did delay this already once before it could have been brought forward in a more comprehensive way. So a delay for the 2 meetings, but kind of that hanging over your head that if it's not done, I would be inclined to then vote to deny it.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
4 weeks would be enough to get a deed restriction in place.
2.
On my end, yes.
What did you say?
4? 2 or 4?
2 meetings.
2 meetings, so May 17th.
2 meetings, not
Okay.
2 weeks.
Okay, 2 meetings.
That's a month.
Yeah, 4 weeks. Okay. I would be more comfortable with that too, so.
Okay. Any other discussion? I would like to express a concern that having a deed restriction is one thing, complying with the MR20 zoning rules is going to be quite another thing.
Yeah, have to look at that.
And should that not be able to happen before the 17th, I will be in the same position as Amy. So, and I would encourage the party to have as much information in there as possible with respect to putting it back to MR12 as possible. I'm looking at you, Craig, because you're, you know.
You're the new attorney.
You're our guy. I can't tell Jeremy what to do.
You can tell anybody what to do, Jeannie, whether they pay attention to it.
I know, that's true. I can try.
So basically, Jeannie, you're saying, let's work on that 30% open space before we get there.
20.
Well, the 22, 30 needs to go up to 30.
30% open space.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, if that doesn't fly, if you can't make that fly, the whole thing falls apart.
That's contingent on compliance.
Yeah.
So,
And Jeannie, just to clarify, this is not going to be a public hearing this next meeting?
no, it will not. So,
I'll call all those in favor of continuing this until May 17th with the conditions set forth. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Get to
Item
work.
D on our agenda are some code amendments with respect to short-term rentals. Mike, you gave us a lot of new information. Would you mind going through it?
Yes.
Please.
Sure. So let me close up my PowerPoint.
And thank you to all the citizens who corresponded with us, who gave input at the neighborhood meetings. It was
A lot of input.
it was great. I think that's why, Mayor Daines and the council have encouraged those neighborhood council meetings to become a place that people can come and voice. So thank you for participating in those and getting information back to us.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
So we actually have two items. An action item is ordinance 22-4, and then I apologize for the confusion, but you have a workshop item 22-08, which is actually municipal code amendments that will trail behind this. They're the procedural stuff about licensing and how we actually manage these things. So I'll actually talk about both, but then I can come back up during the workshop session and talk about that more if you'd like. So based on the direction for the last council meeting, we sent this out to neighborhood councils, neighborhood chairs. We did get some feedback back. You guys got what I've gotten and received. I don't know if you've got other comments. But this is basically a code amendment for short-term rentals. And a short-term rental is a transient rental accommodation. It's rented for short periods of time, less than 30 days. Nightly type of rental. It's commercial in nature. It's different than a typical traditional rental where we have 30 days of distinction. It's not a bed and breakfast. It's not a hotel motel. And the challenge we have is it's not a specified use in our residential and commercial use tables. So for us, the way we look at it now, it's just there's nothing there that allows them. So we've treated them as a prohibited use. That's why we're here. So the proposal that we're back to you with is some of the old language with some new language, but basically the purpose of this section is to regulate short-term rentals to ensure compatibility within residential neighborhoods, ensure they don't unreasonably produce housing opportunities. In the use tables, so 1708, 1711, the proposal is to permit short-term rentals in all residential zones with a conditional use permit, and then permitted in all commercial zones as a permitted use other than the commercial services, industrial, or airport zones. So the proposed general requirements, this applies to temporary accommodations less than 30 days. We want to require a business license, similarly we do like an ADU or a landlord license, things like that. Requires a conditional use permit in residential zones. We've proposed a way to limit the density by having a 500-foot separation between short-term rentals, and I'll show you kind of a schematic that kind of helps lay that out so you understand that. And then also proposal is to limit the total number of licenses in residential zones. So 3 licenses per 1,000 population, and I'll go through that in a little more detail in just a sec. Proposed standards, occupancy, two people per bedroom plus 2 additional people. Require all parking to be located on site, and the minimum standard is 1 stall per bedroom, but a minimum of 2 stalls. Another standard is maintain residential appearance or character. It can't change from being a house to something different. And then the idea is if you get 3 violations in a year, whether it's a nuisance, an occupancy, a parking, a noisy garbage, something that we can validate and actually enforce on, we'll revoke your license. Also propose no multiple contracts for same rental, which means that if you have a big house, they can't rent it out to Mark Anderson, they can't rent out the other half to Amy. It's got to be the same party. And then the other language we added was no rent to the same individual or group for more than 2 consecutive rental contracts in a 6-month period of time. The idea is to get around, I'm going to rent it out to you as a student, you and all your friends are going to do it on a monthly basis. I'm trying to get away from that. So this shows the distancing requirement. There's 2 approaches in the code language. I use Hurricane's model. Basically, when you measure from the front of the property along the street, it's 500 feet between the next short-term rental. So basically walk down the street.
Is it from property line to property line or building to building?
Corner to corner. So
of the property line?
Corner, yeah. Along the street frontage, around the corner. So in this example, it's hard to tell where the property line is, but this little subtle yellow line right there is the property line. So you were to measure from this line down and then up till you got to a point that was 500 feet, then you could have another one up there. The second approach is just do a 500-foot radius around, say from the front door, measure as the crow flies. That's kind of like how we do a liquor license. There's two ways to do it. One is by pedestrian and one is by as the crow flies. So this one, you just go from the front door, measure out 500 feet. Everything within that zone would not allow for a short-term rental.
So
The idea behind this
is this an either or both?
Well, the language, it's in the language that you have tonight in front of you is the 500-foot distance from front to front. Staff and I were talking about this today, let's throw this out as an alternative. It might be easier to process if you just do as a crow flies.
Okay.
It's really the same. It results in about the same thing. But again, the idea is to limit the total density of these within an area so that you don't have 4 of them on a street frontage or, the whole street becomes a short-term rental.
Can I ask a question on that though? So if the star is there with the 500 feet, the backdoor neighbor, 900 could, with the crow flies, they could not, the way I'm looking at that map,
That's correct. Yes. So here's some information about looking at the total number of permits or a maximum number. And again, this is based on a Hurricanes model of they allow for 3 licenses per 1,000 population. If our current population is 52,166, that would mean we'd have 156 available licenses this year. Put it in context, we have 18,900 dwelling units in the city, 9,500 single-family dwelling units, 7,500 detached dwelling units, 2,000 attached residential units. So really, when you look at the proposal for 3 per 1,000, that's about 2% of the total detached housing stock that would be available to be a short-term rental. So it's not a huge percentage or a huge number. That makes sense?
Are we still in this, it says all residential zones, does that include MR20,
Yes.
campus residential, all of that?
It does, and there's also provisions in there that if you want to put a short-term rental into a multi-family unit, you're only going to get 1 in that whole building, because you still have that distance requirement. So the first person in could put one in there, and then everybody else would have to be 500 feet away.
So what about something like Altura?
Well, I'm going to assume that within their rental agreements that they're probably going to just allow that.
Right.
I mean, we can't control that, but yeah, if you're in Altura, once it's there, it's
Once you have 1 there, then
It's
you won't have any more, just because of the distancing.
Okay.
Okay, the conditional use approval criteria, this is what we would gauge whether or not to permit one in a neighborhood. Is it consistent with the requirements of the Land Development Code? Is it compatible with surrounding land uses? Does it interfere with the use and enjoyment of adjoining properties? And some of it's subjective, but those things you can condition for hours of operation, noise, parking, things like that. Compatible with the surrounding neighborhood character. The CUP is aimed at mitigating the possible negative impacts of excessive light, noise, and traffic. So that's the whole idea of going through this process. It also allows for that public notification element, so you let your neighbors know what you want to do, and they have a chance to comment. So the outstanding issues is the occupancy number right? 2 people per bedroom plus 2 additional people. I don't know where you want to land on that. The second one is parking. Are those the right numbers? 1 stall per bedroom, minimum of 2 stalls. It all has to be on site. So if you've got a 5-bedroom house and you want to turn that into a short-term rental, you've got to have basically 5 parking stalls.
Plus 2.
No, just 5. Minimum is 2. So that's
based
your
on the
starting.
bedrooms, not the occupancy.
Oh, minimum, okay.
And then the last issue, the owner occupancy, we've talked about that and kind of gone round and round. And from my perception, we can manage the issues associated with a short-term rental, whether it's owner occupied or not. So, people want to stay there for a family retreat or escape, whatever. I'm not sure they want to share it with Bernie, who's sitting on the couch watching TV and Cheetos. I think for them, it's more appropriate to have.
Is that what your neighbor does?
That was a big visual.
Can I ask one question? So once you get, assume you get to the point where you have the maximum number of licenses, is that sort of grandfathered in forever? I mean, how does a new person, are you going to have a lottery in, future years? Or?
Yeah, let me jump to the licensing provisions for that real fast.
Didn't mean to jump ahead.
No, that's okay. So this is 2208. This is the Logan Municipal Code amendments, Chapter 5.15. And it had to delay just to catch up to what you guys want to do with the land use side of it. So this is the provisions that kind of had a trail. I won't go through.
But be aware, whatever he says on this part will be a public hearing in 2 weeks.
Correct. So this basically says it's the licensing provisions. We're going to require an annual business license. It's non-transferable, so if you own it, I sell my vacation rental to you, you've got to get a new license within a certain period of time. Minimum application requirements, we're going to site plan, floor plan, your state tax ID number, a local contact, your CUP permit. The licensing fee is $100 originally, then $50 a year. We want some kind of local property management, whether it's the person who owns it, whether they have a designated contact, somebody that can be contacted and respond to complaints or issues within a short period of time. We also want the licensing rules of operation posted inside so that folks who rent will know. And this is pretty common. If you stayed in one, you've seen the stuff posted.
So should the local property person be?
Their name and number should be on there as well.
Yeah.
What's local?
Within an hour.
Within an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, so Salt Lake at a fast speed.
Idaho Falls and Ogden.
So the total available license would be based on population, and once we've got to that total cap, then it's basically a waiting list. So if one drops off and it becomes available, then the next person in line would be able to apply for the CUP, apply for the license, and then be next up. So there is incentive, if we do get to that cap and you let your license expire, then you're going to fall off the list and have to go to the end of the line. So there is some incentive there for folks to maintain their licensing.
And that's maintained by community development.
That's
waiting
correct.
list.
Yeah. We'll evaluate the
Not the mayor's
population.
office.
What's that?
Not the mayor's office.
She didn't have it. We'll evaluate the population July 1. We'll use the census, the ACS data, or the city of Utah. We'll commingle the data. As part of the licensing, we want to make sure that they meet minimum building code and zone requirements. So that's egress windows in the bedrooms, smoke detectors, handrails, making sure that the building's safe for people that don't normally live there. Get the CUP permit. We'll do an inspection at the time of licensing, and then we'll do an inspection if we need to based on the complaint. So we'll go in there the first time like we do a business license, and then we'll only respond if needed. And then the penalties will follow the same provisions. We follow further enforcement activities based on land development code. And again, three violations in a year will lead to a revoked license.
Are those 3 validated violations or 3 complaints?
3 validated violations.
Thank you.
And does that revoke it permanently, or is it like suspended, or
Suspended for a year.
suspended for a year? Do you need multiple licenses and multiple conditional use permits if you have multiple units, or?
Yes, it's property specific.
Per property.
And my guy-
Did that answer your question there?
Yeah, so if you have a landlord license then and have multiple properties, you still have to have a specific license to each property.
Yeah, because each property is going to be evaluated independently of its location and context.
And needs its own inspection and.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
So questions?
So I'm not sure where I should ask my question, because if it's on this topic or if it's on our workshop, I don't know if we're blending them, but.
Fair game.
Yeah,
I'll
but
take
I
it now.
talked to you about the fact that, to me, one important part of the enforcement was if they're, to add as a violation, if the person who's responsible for getting back in touch with you doesn't, that be considered a violation. So if there's a noise complaint and you call that person who's supposed to be available within an hour and you get no response back, that should be considered a violation, to ensure that people are responding to questions, to concerns, to problems. So I don't know how to factor that in, but to me,
because
non-response is also a violation. So if you have a noise violation and then you have
noise complaint,
and then somebody you call and you don't respond, you could get 2 violations for 1 incident if you don't make the effort to get back in touch.
Yeah, we'll have to write that into the license provisions, I think.
Somehow, but I just,
Yeah.
to me, that's a huge part of being a responsible landlord, is responsiveness to community development or the police department or whomever is contacting you. That you've got to make a timely response within a 24-hour period, I would think would be a reasonable time frame for that.
Okay, and we can write that in those.
24 hours for a noise complaint?
Well, we want a response, fairly soon, so within an hour. But yeah, if there's an issue with, garbage out in the yard, we want it within 24 hours, or cars parked all over the place, we want something within 24 hours.
I mean, the owner should be in touch with them within 24 hours to address that. violation of that complaint. I don't know, I don't know how to phrase that.
But again,
there needs to be a time-
are they gone in 24 hours and?
No, the owner needs, like, I'm just saying, if there's a problem with your property and you're not responding to whomever you need to within 24 hours, that's a violation. You can't be an owner and I'm not dealing with that. If that happens 3 times, I think you should lose your license.
I agree.
So, and I don't know how to phrase that, but
I think 24 is generous. Because I know people who have short-term rentals in the Providence area, and they say they're all the time. They're available to the people who are renting all the time.
right, this is the response to the city to address a problem. So you think that,
Anyway.
Why don't we work on some
city
language
yeah.
in that licensing section to
That's
address your concern? I know what you're saying, Craig and I can talk it through and figure
like
out.
how to phrase that right? 'Cause-
Yeah, Mike and I will draft up some language and come back with it.
Yeah, because if I'm renting a home and the plumbing breaks and I have to be able to, someone's supposed to get back to me in an hour, that's one issue. This is, there was a problem and we're trying to address it and they're not responsive.
Right.
Does that make sense? I think that 24-hour response.
They rented to drunk and disorderly?
Right, but that 1-hour response is for the rentee, not for the city, right? The way I read it, like,
Well, the
you
idea
have
of
to have
having-
someone available within an hour is,
Yeah, the idea of having somebody within an hour is that if there's a complaint, if they have a problem with the tenant, they need somebody to resolve an issue, or if the neighbors have an issue with noise, they can call somebody that's fairly close and can take care of it. I mean, the idea is that you have somebody that's close, not somebody who's managing from Japan. And that's really the whole purpose. A noise complaint's going to be turned over to the police. They'll go out and knock on the door and tell them to turn it down. Some stuff you just, like cars that are parked crazy, we can tell them to move them over there. But yeah, we want something that's responsive within at least 24-hour period of time to whatever complaints are there.
So you didn't go over the RV boat?
Yeah, that's all I mean, it's in the language, I didn't cover it here, but the idea is that any parking that's generated by your short-term rental has to be handled on site. So if somebody pulls up with a boat, pulling a trailer, they need to park it on the property, or they can't park it.
Within those designated parking places.
That's correct.
Mike, I think you've done a good job. I've, as we all have, received letters from people who are very excited about it, and people are not, so it's all over the place. A lot of people didn't want us to have any code restrictions, and I just don't understand that at all. There has to be some kind of code compliance, certainly. With your item 8, a short-term rental shall not be rented to the same individual group for more than 2 consecutive rental contracts. I really struggle with that. I'm worried that there could be manipulation so that it turns into a student rental, that they can trade off contracts to their buddies and so forth. So
Add one person to the group.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure the best way to get around that, and that's why I put the language in there. The idea is that if I own it, I rent to Mark Anderson, and he's identified him and his party of 6 or whatever, be staying there for a month. He can rent it for 2 months, but he can't rent it for the 3rd month. But I don't know how to get around the fact that somebody's going to do what they're going to do, right?
what if we just had it for one 30-day period?
That's okay unless you have like a professor who's here on a sabbatical and he's here for a couple months. I mean, there's always these little gray areas or nuances. We're just trying to figure out how to manage that potential of somebody deviating, going around the system and trying to create a student rental out of it.
Well, even 60 days doesn't cover a semester.
Right, that's why I went with 60 days. I thought in case somebody was here working for a couple of months, we had an enforcement case against a house on the island where they were working at Walmart remodel, and they were here for probably 6 weeks. So I just thought, well, it seems reasonable if you're here for 2 months, allow that, but it's shorter than a semester.
I like the restriction on the number, because I think that does answer some of the questions that short-term rentals have brought up regarding housing affordability and availability, and I think having that restriction answers some of the questions from some of the citizens that reached out to us. I think 3% seems like a reasonable number. 2% of our housing stock for Airbnbs should have a huge deleterious
Should have a huge
impact.
impact, no.
Yeah.
No. I think you've addressed all the questions that we talked about, Mike, so thank you.
And I think didn't we settle earlier on the 500 feet as a crow flies? It's more
That
conservative.
could be part of a motion. You
Yeah.
can choose.
The proposed language is 500 feet along the street frontage. So you take from the front corner, if you look at my cursor where the arrow is and say this is the property line, you go 500 feet up, and then wherever that ends is where you could put another one. The crow flies is we'll go from the front door and go out 500 feet. Everything outside this radius would be okay. Inside the radius, you couldn't have a second one.
I think it's 500 feet.
Crow flies.
No, just from the door.
Is it only
The
within
frontage. I like the
block?
frontage.
I like the
Or
frontage
is it
versus the
also
crow flies.
applied to
You
the
don't like the crow flies.
block in front of that?
It applies to all the land around it regardless of the block. So it's not just block specific.
So here's a weird question. So if the star, and we're walking, and we walk 500 feet, and we go up, and we're almost to the end there, so now we've got another one there. What happens if the guy over here in this block to the left of the screen wants to have one? Does he have to be 500 feet from that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's from this property corner right here, walking along the street, you cross the street, whatever that distance is, and then you go up to wherever 500 feet terminates.
So at the point of the arrow, though, she's saying that then it'd be 500 feet from the tip of that arrow, if that's 500 feet till where the next one could be, correct? You just
Right.
keep moving 500 feet further out.
Right, correct. It's a simple, just lineal.
So the crow flies issue I would have is like, I could have like a teeny tiny corner of my property that's by the crow flies. Like I could have 2 feet that you could argue is 500 feet, but my front door might not be. Like if you look at 900 North, that's like one of those places. I just think it gets complicated, as you say. 500 feet to, you could be a street view 2 feet into my property and I can't do it in my back.
Yeah.
And I'm like far away from the other entrance to that one because I'm all the way around the corner and around
I like
the
the
block. So
frontage.
I think
I like the
the
frontage better too.
frontage works better from my perspective, but I will support whatever consensus is.
So how do we handle the person who decides they want to build a structure behind their house and call that their Airbnb? They would have to comply with, they would have to come for building permits and all of that?
Yes.
You can't just convert something.
And just convert the shed in the back.
Okay, thank you.
So basically, it's similar to the ADU. You couldn't put a
Right.
tiny home in your backyard and call it a
ADU.
Call it a Airbnb. It would
Right, because
fall
then we
under
cross that
ADU.
threshold into like an ADU where it functions like that.
So
And that's where the owner occupancy issue kind of becomes relevant, is that you don't want to create a situation where somebody is creating that secondary unit in their home, kind of de facto. You know, oh yeah, you can rent 3 bedrooms out, but then over time you realize I don't like strangers walking through my kitchen while I'm sitting there. I'll put up a door and I'll put a separate entrance, and then you kind of create this de facto duplex. So that's where I thought, well, owner occupancy gets a little weird, so just allow them to rent out the whole unit and call it good. But to actually physically construct a second element or a detached unit, then it crosses a different threshold.
So if someone owns, you put in there that if it is a duplex today, you can only rent one part.
Correct.
So as a short-term rental.
That's correct.
So if somebody, so they either have to live there and, never mind.
Well, they could, yeah, it's 2 units. They could rent out one side long-term occupancy, and they could rent out a short-term rental on the other side.
Right.
Then it's the same distance issue that comes up.
Well, what I'm thinking of is the guy with the apartment in the basement. That might or might not be legal at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a separate issue from a legality standpoint of whether or not it's legal or not. It's if he's got a home with a basement and he wants to turn it into a short-term rental, then he can do that. If he chooses to,
He's gonna have to get a license and get.
still has to get the
inspected.
license, CUP, all those things, so they'll have a chance to explore that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Anybody have any more questions?
Just to clarify, make sure I understand. Number 7, short-term rental may not be subject multiple rental contract. You have a house, you can't rent it out to 2 parties
That's correct.
or more.
Right.
Okay.
So if anybody's ready for proposing a motion?
I think it's a good place to start.
So, some of the, before we do that, so I also talked to Mike about a couple of options. And I guess these aren't related to the bill, but I thought it would be good if we did if there was some sort of workshop that was presented to people who were interested in doing Airbnb that could come and learn about it, learn what all the issues were, what it means to have a license and all of those things. I think that we should set something like that up under community development to help people who aren't savvy to learn and make sure that they're doing it right. So hopefully that would prevent more problems and make them understand why they need to be licensed too. Like, why are we doing this for our city? I think that would be an important thing. And as I looked at other communities that are doing this, a lot of them have an actual separate complaint process on their website for complaints versus mingling it with compliance problems. So for example, Park Cities, if you go to their website, it's like, I have a complaint on a short-term rental. It's a completely different form. They can upload pictures, video, whatever it is that they need to, so that it's easy for people in those neighborhoods to make sure that they can easily make the city aware and can
do it quickly,
resolve it quickly. So I don't think that fits into the ordinance, but
No, we can explore that. I mean, it's all scale. Park City's probably got thousands of them. We're looking at 150.
Right, but just some way that it's easy, like people as a neighbor know, how do I make this, register this complaint because it's a short-term rental versus.
Right.
Anyway.
So I'll talk about this in the workshop, never mind.
Yeah, I'm confused as to what's in our workshop and what's in this right now.
The only thing in the workshop is the licensing part.
Okay.
It's a workshop. Tell me about that.
It's coming up. We have to do this first. This
So-
is the language that this is the shell around which we're
All
going
right,
to operate short-term
but it's not
rentals.
going to be the ordinance, I guess.
Yeah, it
And
is.
this is ordinance 2204, so it's the Land Development Code amendments. So in your packet, it's the first component, and then the workshop is the second packet.
Right, so this is just the shell, and then the business part comes later.
Okay, well, I'm interested in having that single rental contract, 30 days, so I'll make the motion that this be accepted with the one change of having a single rental contract
30 days within 6 months?
within the
30 days.
6-month period.
Okay.
That's a motion.
Is there a second to that motion? Is everybody just thinking, or?
Thinking. I kind of like Mike's idea with the 2, with the 60 days,
You like
yeah.
that? Well, I'm not going to fall on a sword.
Would you like to amend your motion?
There's a question, but it's not that big of a deal.
No, but would you like to?
I'll amend it to be
as is,
as Michael has written it.
Okay.
It has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for all your
Good, nice
work
job,
on
Mike.
this.
Good work.
We'll move now to our workshop items. First item on the agenda is Rich, always.
How come he gets to go first all the time?
So I can sleep after. There's a good nap. It's a request to appropriate $1.4 million in donated funds toward the construction of the new library. And if you have any questions, the mayor would love to answer those.
We had a great groundbreaking yesterday, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And it's very exciting that we're moving forward, and we're so thrilled that these donors have stepped forward and allowed us to build what we have designed, because we were faced with having to cut a lot of the the special kind of interesting things out if we hadn't received that money, because we are very budget conscious here and we were going to stick within our budgets. So.
Do you want to mention the donors since that was
I
not
will
mentioned
mention, again, we
else?
sent out a press release, but the Hanson Sisters Foundation donated $1 million to the library project and
To
to name the children's area of the library after Deloy Hanson's 6 daughters and 24 grandchildren. And then Cache Valley Bank.
That's going to be a big plaque.
Well, they said they didn't need all the names on it.
I'm just teasing.
Cache Valley Bank contributed $200,000 toward the community meeting rooms, and the Paul and Kim Willey Family Foundation donated $200,000 towards the plaza, the kind of the entryway plaza, and former Mayor Peterson and his wife Mary Dee previously contributed $100,000, and the south outdoor terrace on the second level will be named in their honor. So we've had some great support.
So didn't that add up to 1.5 million?
Yes, but Mayor Peterson's donation came earlier, so that was already included. So
All right.
the additional funds were what we could budget towards the extra expenses.
And I thought it was really quite wonderful that Deloy was there, and he said, we are thrilled to be able to support the community that has been ours for most of our lives. And I think that was a really wonderful honor to us and to them.
And the one little grandson that was there, his name is Logan.
Yep. And it was very cute because, oh shoot, now I'm not going to be able to say it. Never mind. Go ahead. Paul, now I can say it.
I
Paul
have
Willey's
questions
daughter.
for you, Rich.
Yeah, Paul Willey's daughter had on a t-shirt, and her t-shirt was a pile of books, and it said, "Get Lit." And I said, "You have the right shirt on for this." And she said, "Oh, look at my earrings." And they were books too. So it was great. Rich?
That's it.
That's it? That's it. Okay.
You can go to sleep now.
Thank you.
Russ, we're ready for micromobility.
This is too exciting to sleep through. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for this opportunity. Micromobility. This is a term that a lot of folks don't know what it means. I've been asking random people over the months, and I've gotten some really interesting answers. But we as a group, over the last several months, have created a collaborative working group that's contributed to this effort thus far. So I'd like to recognize Russ Aquina, Debbie Harvey, Tanya Rice, Emily Malik, Camilla Schultz, Paul Lindhart, Gary Jensen, Barry Parslow, Carly Lanch, Jordy Guth, and Councilwoman Amy Anderson for their efforts thus far on micromobility.
Yay, Amy, you're the one who brought this
Okay, what is micromobility? Micromobility is a term that's relatively new, but it describes a wide variety of personal transportation devices. I think it's a term that's here to stay, at least from a governmental regulation standpoint. A lot of jurisdictions are using micromobility to define these devices, and they include bikes, e-bikes, scooters, e-scooters, skateboards, e-skateboards, one-wheels, rollerblades, and similar devices. They're typically lightweight and travel at speeds less than 20 miles per hour. They have maximum size e-motors of 750 watts or 350 watts. And typically the e-assist, either the throttle or the pedal assist, stops working when the bike or scooter reaches 20 miles an hour. So governor is what a lot of folks call that. Micromobility is not motorcycles, motor scooters, or similar types of vehicles. Those are classified and regulated as motor vehicles and belong on the street in the travel lanes with the cars and the trucks.
What about the powered wheelchair? Are they regulated separately?
Yes, a powered wheelchair is not micromobility. They're like an ADA assisting device.
Okay, so they have different regulations.
Yeah, well, they're treated just like a pedestrian.
Okay, thank you.
Essentially.
And they go more than 20 miles an hour.
Some don't, some do.
Pretty quick.
Yes.
And I apologize because I'm trying to get this presentation mode and I'm not sure if I'm...
Hey Russ, I personally got a scooter going 26 when I went off a jump, and Jeff was there as well. So is that not
The moment you reach 21 miles an hour, you no longer... Just kidding.
I've seen scooters
you
on
can-
the street that have passed me as a car.
Yes, as a bike, without an E-assist, you can go much faster than 20 miles an hour, going down a hill. But e-bikes, e-scooters, they typically range below 20 miles an hour. Okay, so why now? Logan City's current code is outdated in applicability and terminology. It lacks proper definitions in all new types of devices, infrastructures, and facilities that are common today. The current Parks and Recreation Department policies don't clearly regulate e-devices on the trails and shared use paths. Our police department under the current code is required to collect a $1 fee and inspect a bike and place a metal license plate on that bike. So we're not doing that, and the question is, why would we do that? I mean, it's very outdated code language for this section of municipal code. The section is 68 and 70, titled Bicycles and Skateboards. The other reason why is Utah State University is essentially in the exact same boat as the city right now. Their current policies are outdated and they don't define and manage these new types of transportation devices, personal transportation devices. And so we've been working hand in hand with them. We've shared our language and vice versa. And we have similar proposed language. Now their process of adoption is quite different than ours. They go through a series of colleges and deans, and I think they're trying to get something adopted by next fall semester. And then also why now is
Old people are using them.
Lastly, but most importantly, is folks are already using these, and their popularity is increasing. Sales of these devices has increased every year. With the pandemic, they skyrocketed. E-bikes or e-scooters has opened up the market to a much wider range of folks that maybe normally wouldn't buy a bicycle or a scooter. Kids love these devices. So I think it's safe to say these are here to stay, whether we like it or not. Okay, so in that case, what's the best way to manage these? Our proposal includes that they still have to follow laws. It's not carte blanche. They still have traffic laws, speed limits. Pedestrians will have the primary right-of-way in all cases. You can't ride these more than 2 abreast. No reckless behavior is allowed, and 1 hand on the handlebar at all times is required.
But they can ride on the sidewalk.
I'm going to get to that. Hold your horses.
So how do you handle, did you address the 2 and 3 people on 1 scooter?
Yes, that is addressed in the code. Unless you're on a tandem bicycle, it's 1 rider per device.
Okay,
So
because I've seen like 3 kids on a scooter. It's like,
the device is designed for 1 person and 1 person is allowed.
okay.
Okay, so trails and shared use pathways. This is the Parks and Rec issue we brought up earlier. In most cases, micromobility is not a problem. The trails are wide enough and capable enough that they can handle micromobility. Again, these typically behave like a normal bicycle or like a normal scooter. When you see a person riding an e-bike or an e-scooter, They look more like a bike and a scooter than they do a motorcycle, okay? They do go a little faster up the hills, but they behave and appear more like a bike than a motorbike. This code proposes language that if there are problem areas on a certain section of trail, a certain intersection of trail, the city has the flexibility to manage that differently. So we may create a dismount zone or prohibit micromobility for this section of trail because of the conditions or reasons, but it gives the city the ability to site-specific manage problematic areas.
And not just trails, sidewalks as well.
So, but
Yes.
just, I don't want to keep interrupting, but if say you're on the Highline Trail.
No
Yes.
bikes, no bikes are allowed on Highline.
Okay.
Different
So-
example. Because there's too many sharp corners and they were concerned about that.
Right,
so
well, I've seen many bikes on it, but,
Shouldn't be.
you know, as long as if we have an area that is specifically where we feel like it's not appropriate, they would move to the street in that area? Would that be our hope?
Or they would dismount and
They'd walk it.
Okay,
I'll get to that.
okay, thank you, sorry.
No problem. So the point I'm trying to make on the trails is the best way to educate and reach folks is going to be through trail signage, through markings on the pavement surfaces, through social media, and through handouts. And that's how we'll manage those problematic areas, inform and educate. The fact that it's in the municipal code doesn't mean folks are reading the municipal code.
What?
I hate to break it to you,
That's what
but
we spent all this time on.
most people aren't reading the municipal code.
Until they need to know something.
Here's some examples of some signage and some markings that we may want to utilize in problematic areas. Okay, the proposal also includes the opportunity to create a scooter share program with a scooter share company. It creates definitions and a framework to allow an agreement to be forged. Only when a specific user agreement is signed between the city and that company. The specific user agreement will define how these devices are parked, how they're distributed and redistributed, things that could possibly be problematic. So the top picture shows a tidy bunch of scooters that I think most folks would be okay with. The bottom right looks like a mess and could be a problem. They have both dock and dockless systems, and a lot of the dockless systems are actually going to a hybrid where they have certain designated areas where you're supposed to park and store these so that it's not too cluttered. Okay?
So you said we're going to have one vendor. Is that us and the university?
My suggestion is to include the university in the user agreement, as the campus is surrounded by the city, and folks using these micromobility devices are going to traverse in and out of those jurisdictions. I think it makes absolute sense to have basically a three-way agreement with that user.
Okay. As long
Whether
as
it's one company or multiple companies, that would be to be determined.
But I think it's a good idea for us to for it to be a three-way agreement for whatever it is.
I absolutely
Yeah, I
agree
agree.
with you.
So one thing too that I think many people don't realize is that those companies also can do geofencing. So if there is an area that scooters, people are supposed to dismount, or you want to control the speed, those companies have the ability to do that. So those rental scooters and e-bikes
Can't fly down Fourth North?
basically would stop.
So they just don't
It
have
turns
it.
them off,
Oh,
or it
Oh my
slows
gosh.
them down.
It would
It's
have-
geofencing.
It doesn't
It's gonna be
limit
really
personal
specific.
devices,
Doesn't limit
but,
personal, but the companies themselves have that ability to geofence.
Wow.
That's a great.
A couple other benefits would be revenue sharing with these companies. They'll actually give cities revenue to build new trails or to build new bike lanes. And they are also willing to share their data with cities, which is very helpful when you try to decide where to build those new bike lanes. If there's very popular routes evident with their data, then that's the place to invest. And again, I think it's wise to coordinate with USU and do a three-way agreement. Okay, on sidewalks or not on sidewalks. This was the biggest debate amongst the working group. Where do these belong? Should they be in the street? Should they be in the sidewalk? Should they be somewhere else? And that's one of the biggest problems with these nationally, is where do they belong? There's not a lot of order and predictability with these yet. I think we will get to a point where we do have order and predictability, but it's going to take some time. Right now, we have okay facilities. I mean, we every year we try to improve our facilities with a new bike lane or a new trail. We don't have exceptional facilities, nor do we have terrible facilities. But most people that purchase a new e-bike are going to ride where they're most comfortable, regardless of what's in the municipal code that they never read, or regardless of what they see me doing out on the street. They're going to ride where they're most comfortable. Mothers with children are not going to ride in a street.
Nor should they.
Older folks that are maybe hesitant, but that they want to get out and use their new e-bike because they want to get exercise or whatever reason, they're typically going to gravitate to areas that they feel more safe. And this photograph example here, are you going to ride in the street, or are you going to take the path in the sidewalk? We ultimately ended with code that says sidewalk riding is allowed, but the city reserves the right, again, just like the trails, that in problematic areas, we have mandatory dismount zones. We have different speed limits or rules in those problematic areas that, again, will use signage, markings, and other information to educate folks on how to behave. Again, we emphasize that pedestrians are always the primary right-of-way. So if you see a person walking, you get off your micromobility or you shift to the side and let them go. But we felt that was the best approach because of the reasons I just mentioned. Folks are already on the sidewalk.
I'm going to tell you that those boards with the big wheel, they don't make any noise. And I've been out walking the dog, and the dog goes that way, and the micro-mobility guy goes, whoom, and I didn't even know he was there.
Can I say, Russ, I got on one of these e-bikes yesterday, and it was fun.
They are fun.
And I was down on the downtown, I was at
A local store?
the local store, we'll just say that. But as I thought about it, I used to own a building downtown, and I got hit by a bicycle. And the thing is, when you come out of a door, nobody sees you, and you're going on a sidewalk and somebody's going 20 or so miles.
Well, I thought a long, long time ago, we restricted bicycle riding in historic downtown, that you could not ride on the sidewalk in historic
Our
downtown.
current code does say that. You can't ride a skateboard or a bicycle from 2nd South to 5th North.
Okay, I was illegal then.
We're proposing changes to that for bicycles. Now, we still prohibit skateboards in those areas because skateboards pose a different impact with the grinding and things on the furnishings or the infrastructure.
Ollieing over
but
the stairs.
To answer your question, the new language requires folks to make an audible sound before they try to overtake or pass someone from behind, so that you don't sneak up on them.
There'll need to be some good education on this.
Well, I gotta tell you what, if they start going, on your right, like they do in skiing, it won't be very effective.
Now, the code does say that when bike lanes are present, you should move to the bike lane. Move off the sidewalk, move to the bike lane. Now, that gets back to the comfort level. Cities that have invested more in infrastructure have created what we call protected bike lanes, and that's what you see here on the bottom left.
Yeah.
That space is much more comfortable. You're going to see mothers with kids out in that space. You're going to see all types of riders because they feel safe and comfortable. From a driver's perspective, that's more orderly and predictable, right? You know, okay, the cars are here, the bikes and e-bikes are here, and the pedestrians are here. And that's how it's defined. It's hard to see, but this is a curve right here. And so this is sidewalk, this is protected bike lane, this is street. This example was kind of cool because they actually moved the park strip out and plant some trees and shrubbery out here, but it's similar. This one includes some driveway cuts, and sometimes you have to have some periodic breaks to allow cars in and out. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and again, it gets down to that comfort level and how much you want to encourage folks to get out and use micromobility. They can be as easy as putting these plastic candlesticks in here or putting flower pots out and planting some cute flowers in the summertime. One cool thing about this top right is this one actually moves the parallel parking out, so the parked cars actually provide a buffer from the moving cars. So you feel really safe over here. And this striped area handles the door zone, so folks that are swinging a door open are not going to hit a bike rider. Okay, a quick pitch for investing in micromobility, the bigger picture. So the picture on the right top is the reason we all love to live in Cache Valley. It's the reason why folks move to Cache Valley. The bottom right is the reason why people will move out of Cache Valley. Car-centric sprawl is very impactful to our built environment. And car-centric sprawl is unsustainable. The more we drive, the more we sprawl, the more we sprawl, the more we have to, in turn, drive. And it's farther and farther every year. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone in this room when we see new car washes, new credit unions to finance our new cars, new car dealers, new restaurants with double-wide drive-throughs. It should be a surprise because we're a car-centric community. We are. We've done it for the last 70 years, and we are what we are. Micromobility will give us more transportation options. Micromobility can help some of the impacts of car-centric sprawl. If we rely a little bit more on micromobility and a little bit less on cars, we won't have to widen our roads as frequently as we do. We won't have to build as big of parking lots. Our air quality will improve. We'll have more space to plant trees. We'll get more exercise as a community.
We'll live longer.
We'll live longer. Health departments are currently, yes, live long and prosper. Thank you, Spock. Health departments are incentivizing cities to get people out and more active walkability. They're finding that car-centric societies are unhealthy lifestyles. Moving on. This is just a quick, this is the block just south of us. So if we could somehow replace 30% of our car trips, and maybe that's we carpool once a day, maybe we trip chain, which is, you know, you have 3 destinations, but you go to one and park and walk to the other. You ride transit, you ride micromobility because it's so awesome and fun. But looking at the block just south of us, this is a downtown block that's really trying hard to be a suburban sprawl pattern. It's about 60% parking lot, 20% building mass, and about 10% landscaping.
That was a bad choice, though, because it's all owned by the county.
This is a random block. You can pick and choose numerous blocks. But if we could reduce 30% of our trips and 30% of the parking area on this block, we could generate 1.3 acres of land that we could use to create 7 small commercial businesses, So I actually took the footprint of the coffee shop across the street, West Side, and we could fit 7 of those in there. Now, I'm not saying we need that much coffee, but imagine replacing a parking lot with 7 small businesses that can serve the neighborhood. We could do mixed use, multi-story, that could equate to 100 housing units. Now, if you think about that, in an NR6 zone out on the periphery of town where we have rural areas, agrarian, beautiful landscapes that we all value and cherish, it would take 16 acres to generate 100 homes in that zone. And yet we could do it here on 1.3 acres. So there's a lot of reasons to encourage micromobility and maybe, throttle back a little bit on automobiles. Space is a big issue. If you look at this right graphic, it shows how many people you can move per hour if you're in a single occupant car or if you're in a double occupant car. It looks at the amount of people you can move in an hour in bike lanes, people walking, and then people on a bus or transit. So if you talk about person per square foot, the car takes up a lot of space and doesn't move a lot of people. Okay, so to wrap things up, I would encourage that we invest more in micromobility facilities so that we can, get micromobility off the sidewalk and into protected bike lanes. If we connect those protected bike lanes with our trails that exist, we can create a really great network of both recreation and active transportation for folks so that they have a viable alternative. I don't think it's wise for cities to put all their eggs in one basket. And from a transportation standpoint, we've been doing that for 70 years with automobiles. We saw it just a few weeks ago with the gas prices. We don't control gas prices. What if they go up to a point where all of a sudden your car isn't as viable as you want it to be, And what are the alternatives available? I think cities need to diversify and put more eggs in walkability, micromobility, and transit to help in those situations. Okay, one last plug for Trails Cash. Next meeting, May 3rd at 4:30 p.m., we will have 2 e-bikes available for anyone in the crowd as well as the council and administration to go out and test ride if you want to test ride an e-bike to get a better feel for some of these things. So that will be May 3rd at 4:30 p.m.
So I actually wore this outfit on purpose today to council because when we demoed the micromobility scooters, I scootered in heels and a dress. So you can use micromobility, you don't have to be dressed to exercise. So anyway.
How did you stop it?
Well, I mean, it slows slowly, it brakes, it slows slowly.
Oh, it doesn't,
step off.
because a lot of them have a thing on the back that makes it go. That's why I asked the question. It's like you step on the back and it goes.
So I would show my shoes, but that might be
You can ride micromobility.
I rode a scooter in these shoes.
You can ride micromobility in high heels or a pantsuit.
Oh, you did the scooter.
I did the scooter.
I know, the helmet looks nice on me.
She had on the same shoes.
I said I wore the same outfit because I didn't realize that picture was
And
going
there's
to be out
Holly.
there.
I at least had flats on.
Wow.
But Amy didn't have a helmet on, but Holly did. Totally dangerous.
Well, I have to admit, my husband, who's hated bikes for years, just bought 2 e-bikes. So my new e-bike is sitting in my basement waiting for him to put it together. So I will be joining the crowd with Peter.
Woohoo!
Okay, any questions? That wraps up my presentation.
Yeah, I rode an e-bike for 7 days in Croatia, and I would never have made it without it. Because we went,
So, Russ, were there any specific other items in the ordinance? Because the ordinance is pretty has some specifics that you think people should be aware of in terms of definitions or anything?
I think the big thing is it's updating the language to our current terminology. It creates definitions. We don't even have definitions now. And really, again, the crux of our debates back and forth was, do we allow them on the sidewalks or not? And if so, how do we regulate them? The other stuff, I think, is pretty straightforward.
We are recommending you register your bike, and that's part of this too. So it does cover more than just where people can ride. It does cover your bike should be registered.
I want to ask that question. Chief, are you prepared to be the bike registry place?
Trust me, it's going to be a lot easier on him. It's a little sticker. It's not a metal license plate anymore. It's a little sticker.
Well, when I was a kid, you had to take your bike down to the police station, and you had to take a little course that taught you how to do,
signals, wheelies,
stop, all that stuff, and you had to ride around a little, the parking lot, and then they would put the sticker on your bike, and then you were good to go.
Nobody does that.
No, they don't do it anymore, and it was a really small town, so I understand that, but I just think, would it be beneficial if indeed people did register their bikes and if they got stolen?
We could look into it, for sure.
I mean, what they should do is take a picture of the serial number and have it, of the bike serial number. I mean, with camera, everybody has a camera on their phone. It's like, if they have a picture of it, it's all they need to report.
But it could be a place too to hand out rules of the bike road when people register their bikes too.
True. And I would be all for not having people ride bikes on Center Street between Main Street and First West.
Yes, that will be a dismount zone.
Walk your bike only zone. Because that could be super scary with people eating on the outside, bikes, people walking. I just think, and it's only going to, with the plaza, it's only going to get it's only going to be expanded. So.
Need bike racks at the plaza.
We do have some plans for the plaza.
Bike racks.
Wow, that's exciting. That's very exciting.
I guess I will buy that bike then.
You can spend the big bucks.
Nice presentation, Russ. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will see this as an ordinance in 2 weeks, and there will be a public hearing.
Correct.
Okay. And it is available for people to peruse with our council agenda packet this evening. I want to get people to be engaged in this. Mike, now you're going to talk about landlord or short-term rental licensing.
Only if you want to.
I said, didn't we cover it already?
Unless there's any specific licensing questions.
Do you have a question?
I can walk through it again, though, if you really want to stay here longer.
I think I asked, as I said, I was confused as to which was what, so I'm pretty sure all of my questions got answered on this. So.
Does anybody have any additional questions about short-term licenses?
No.
Nope? You're good.
Okay.
Awesome. Chief.
Best presentation
Okay.
ever.
The last item on our agenda is Chief Hennig. Talking about fireworks.
So, Mayor and Council, it's that time of year where we have to discuss fireworks restriction zones. Just so you're kind of aware, I mean, as we talk about water shortages, as we talk about snow melt, all those kind of factors are obviously a concern for us as well for different reasons. Heavy spring rain causes a lot of grass growth, which becomes a potential issue. So some of the times when we work for water restrictions, they work against fire protection in the long run during those drier months of the season. Last year, we had an above average red flag warning days. Red flag warning means warm temperatures, very low humidity, and strong winds are expected to combine to produce an increase or high risk of fire danger or fire behavior. So as we look at the restrictions this year, because of the drought we've had over the last couple of years, we're actually asking a request to narrow that restriction zone, especially up on the east bench between 16 and 1,200.
Narrow it or widen it?
Widen the restriction zone, sorry.
Widen
I was
restrictions.
like,
That's the right term.
yeah.
I meant,
Make it
narrow the allowable zone or increase the restricted zone. So that boundary line will move from 1600 east to 1200 east. There's a couple of reasons for that. We did have some issues last year, or at least some concern with the possibility of a fireworks at the golf course, which in the old zone was allowed, which we feel like is way too close to Logan Canyon and houses and a potential hazard area.
They had full-on
And so in order for us to kind of deal with that, plus the development that's starting to happen in the gravel area and adjacent to that, we feel like there's going to be potential stick frame homes throughout the summer. Those are all potential concerns for us moving forward. So based on just the state code, which states that when a hazardous environment condition necessitates the controlled use of ignition source, including fireworks, the legislative body, the municipal, may prohibit the use of ignition sources in mountainous, brush-covered areas, forest-covered areas, wildland, urban interface area, undeveloped land, and agricultural land. So those, a predominant amount of that area that we're talking about falls within that zone. So if you look at the map up here, thanks, Jeff. This is the restricted areas in red, and so the big change is that from 16 to 12, so we're encompassing a little bit more on that east bench. There are some discussions, does that need to be, by delineating lines, which they like us to do, the east bench lines up at 1,200, even though it doesn't necessarily visually on the map. The line, when you describe it, is more consistent with the 1,200. So whether we need to, be a little tighter on the cliffside area is a good question. This is your council's decision. We just recommend. So
That'll take out pretty much the whole Hillcrest neighborhood.
It does.
And so I've wondered up on, 1400 East, just below Gibbons Park there, that's the dividing line, and we have the park on the east side, but if you go a little further south, there's some gullies, there's some kind of wildland area that snakes down into, River Heights and so on, and again, it's pretty close to dry areas there too. It's not as easy to delineate on a map with a line, but.
Last year, we've had some, obviously 2020 was probably one of the worst fire seasons that we've had in a considerable amount of time. There was over 350,000 acres affected by fire. And now there was a reduction in 2021, and a lot of that had to do with, I believe, just the drought conditions, the media. There was a lot of cities who even restricted fireworks altogether. Whether that was a legal thing, we didn't feel like that we could do that, but there was plenty of cities that did it anyway. So, there was, my worry is that we go right back to where we were in the past if we don't change, behavior and further restrict, especially as drought conditions aren't improving necessarily by any measure that we can feel confident that, these potential issues aren't here. I hate to say that, we've been lucky, right? And because this is very weather specific and very unpredictable. But we've seen some catastrophic issues in many cities throughout the country that was never expected to be a concern, especially Colorado, who lost those homes in the middle of winter. So as we consider this stuff, these are the things that keep me up at night as your fire chief, to say how do we best protect the city, especially for things that are extracurricular and not necessary, to the livelihood of the city. We're moving them. Yeah, they're gonna have to look for another location, at least that Hillcrest neighborhood, but so does Lundstrom Park already. And if we Lundstrom Park, which, if we further restrict water by July and that grass becomes, and we allow fireworks on the other side of the street, is that being irresponsible? So that's why we feel like it's best suited to move in line. Again, as the mayor mentioned, there probably could be some more look, we could look at a little closer that area that she's discussing to further restrict. Now, with all this said, we're still at the mercy of other cities that determine their own. But we, as we cover Providence and North Logan, we also request them to look at that very closely as well.
Actually, I was just going to ask that because, North Logan
is at 1,600.
They're at 1,600.
But I don't know how
Do you think they might
to
change that this year?
I've asked them, right, and requested that, but, I can only request.
Okay.
I thought you had a fire station.
In North Logan, I do.
Yeah.
Well, we run it.
They have a contract to provide fire services, but this is a
But
decision
it's
that
still
has
a
to be
city,
made by
it's
city
still a
council.
municipal service. I
I'm
only
a
can
little
request.
concerned with these fingers that go out there because, the drift that happens when, we have some people that live above us.
I think
and they
that's just the road, the name of the road, Tom. That Quail Way, that's not excluded, that's just white around the street name so that you can read the street name.
That's on the south side of Canyon Road.
Yeah.
He's talking about the finger that goes down Canyon Road and the finger that goes down.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought you were
Goes
talking
down
about-
that
okay.
area, but I don't understand exactly why not all of that bench area isn't part of that red.
Well, the problem is the way the state describes the delineating lines, they have to be based on a thoroughfare, consistently described so that the public is aware of where those delineating lines is.
Well, there's
So
a
that-
big road that goes up there. It can be right there at that road.
And we certainly can look at that and say, hey, this from west of this, specific street, north and south, we could do that.
Because if it's gonna be as dry as it was
If it's
last year.
dangerous on both sides of this and it's a fairly narrow area, I think you don't lose much by closing off.
Right. We certainly can look a little closer at some of those areas you're discussing and tighten that up a little bit. If you want to further restrict,
Yeah.
we certainly can do that.
Better be safe.
It's really only 2 nights. Well, it really isn't, I guess.
Well,
I'm
I mean,
at
I say you,
1185 Canyon Road, we're good, 1200, it's all good.
the July 2nd through the 5th is a concern at certain times of the year, depending on the dry conditions, which certainly can dramatically change very quickly. Always the 24th is our probably primary concern.
Yeah.
But, as we look at this is what makes it very difficult to predetermine because we set these by May 1st and have to kind of, in essence, live. It doesn't mean we can't change them, but you have to do that, and that requires, a couple weeks time to make it happen. It can't be done immediate. I can't make that arbitrarily.
So remind me what the enforcement looks like and what happens if I set up a firework in a restricted area? Who gets the phone call and how is that enforced? Is that police? Is that
Yeah,
fire?
so any ticketing is done by the police department. We do help patrol that. This past year, we did have overtime units and we did require all our apparatus to travel in restricted areas. I feel like that presence was more dramatic than we've ever had and had a better outcome. I think it's multifaceted. I think the public was more aware of the concern, and I think just the presence of us being there deterred, including police patrolling the areas as well. And so we will do that again to make sure that our presence is known. But any ticketing, actual ticketing, we call on PD and they actually provide the ticketing. They actually do the citation.
The signage has been good.
And we do a pretty good job. I commend my staff for the work that they put forward, especially our prevention team that puts out those signs. We have bought more and more each year to have them more visible and so that the public is fully aware of where. We've also had discussions with commercial from a state standpoint. State chiefs have had discussions with commercial vendors to ensure that their signage at display booths, at least non-brick and mortar type, have signage. Their posters that they show are a little bigger and that information provided there is, more accessible to the public so that they're clearly aware of where restricted zones are.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you so much. We are at the end of our meeting. Are there any other considerations?
What's the plan for
Why do you always look at me when you ask that?
Because I always look this way first.
Mayor, what's the plan for
No,
4th of
nothing from
July
me.
fireworks?
At Willow Park, community celebration at Willow Park. Willow Park, that's what it is.
Same as it was.
Yeah, it's like for me, I have.
Sometimes you have something you want to add, more often than not. You have an event that you need to talk about.
I always have things I can talk about.
So, anyway, hearing none, we are adjourned.
Awesome.